You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Hristodoulou.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron. I'm Ethan Hristodoulou, and today, now that Aaron Rodgers has finally agreed and signed with the Pittsburgh Steelers, we can dive in. We're going to go back to offenses. We started defenses at the end of middle of last week. It's been a while since we last talked. Life got a little bit crazy last week altogether between the end of the week and the weekend, but we're going to wrap up offenses now. I said we would as soon as Aaron Rodgers made things official with the Steelers, or not if it didn't happen. So we're looking at AFC North offenses, ranking them 4 through 1. So whether you're a fan of any of the 4 teams, or maybe you're just somebody who likes to listen to these discussions, comment down below. Let me hear from you all. Do you agree? Do you disagree? How would you rank these teams yourselves? Fire away in the comment section. Let me hear from y'all. And if you want to tell me I'm wrong, by all means, but bring an argument to the table at the very minimum, please. That being said, we'll start with the number 4 team and work our way up to the top. And at the very bottom of this list here, there was no ifs, ands, or buts about this in my eyes. And I'm sorry, Browns fans, to be very blunt with the fact, but Cleveland sitting at the bottom is a pretty clear and obvious spot in my eyes for this team right now, because I believe the saying goes, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. And I think that quadruple applies for a team that currently has 4 quarterbacks, which means you definitely don't have a legitimate quarterback at this point. Don't get me wrong, Joe Flacco in his spots has been intriguing at the very minimum. He has his strokes of genius, but along with it comes these crazy interceptions as well. So, I mean, yeah, he's the veteran presence in the locker room as far as quarterbacks are concerned, and honestly on the entire team. I would assume he's the oldest guy on the roster. If there's anyone older on the Browns roster, I'd be kind of shocked. But at this stage right now, it seems like he might end up being the guy. It's obviously still way too early to tell, but you, of course, have a handful of young quarterbacks behind him, and, of course, Kenny Pickett, and then the 2 draft selections you have in both Dylan Gabriel, and on top of that, Shedeur Sanders as well. And as things currently stand, there's no guarantees of Shedeur getting an opportunity as the number 1 quarterback. There's no guarantee of Dylan Gabriel, and I would be surprised if Kenny Pickett's the guy that winds up winning that quarterback battle. I'm not sold. And when you're looking at the most important position on a football team in quarterback, and this is the state of your quarterback room, that alone makes me really concerned about what this offense could look like. But it's not all doom and gloom. I don't want to sit here and act like there aren't good things about the Cleveland Browns offense. There's just not a ton of things I'm super high on altogether. I will say, if the O-line stays healthy, I do like the starting 5 that you have there, but the if healthy thing is a big one because it's been an issue for this team the last few seasons now. So you, of course, have Ethan Pocic and Pocic, however you pronounce his last name. If I'm saying that wrong, excuse me, correct me in the comment section, please. And then, of course, Joel Bitonio as well. They stayed on the field basically all of last season, but you look at the opposite side of Joel Bitonio, and then both the tackle spots as well, dealing with a ton of injuries at varying points of the season. You need that line to stay healthy and to be on the field, because I don't really think the depth is super impressive. They did go and try to fill things out a little bit. You brought in a guy like Tevin Jenkins from Chicago, Cornelius Lucas as well from Washington. So, I mean, hopefully if the O-line stays healthy, you at least get a better look than what you got from last season. Beyond that, I mean, the tight end room, I actually do really like. I think David Njoku combined now with the draft selection of Harold Fannin Jr. is a really interesting combination. I think Harold Fannin Jr., a guy that's known for really good route running and really sure hands, he's somebody who would do a really good job, at least in his first season, spelling David Njoku, who honestly, when he's on the field and he's healthy, looks extremely good, and he's a top 10 tight end in the NFL. And then there's the wide receiver room. You basically have a 3rd-round selection in Cedric Tillman. I want to make sure I double-check that. Yes, 3rd-round selection in 2023 in Cedric Tillman. Wanted to make sure I'm calling his draft selection correctly there. And then, of course, Jerry Jeudy. Those are like the 2 constants of the wide receiver room, at least at this current moment here. Cedric Tillman in spots has shined, but he has not really hit that next level that you would like him to at this current stage in his career. And then Jerry Jeudy, of course, coming off of what was the most impressive season, I would say, of his career to this very point. I am excited to see how he continues to evolve in Kevin Stefanski's offense, but beyond those 2 guys, there's a lot of just really unknowns and uncertainty and a lot of new people you're plugging into spots here. Of course, you have Deontay Diontae Johnson, who's been bouncing around the league and can't really seem to stick anywhere. You bring in a DeAndre Carter as well. You have Jamari Thrash, who could end up seeing a lot of snaps for you. He was a 5th-round draft pick in last year's NFL draft. Way too much uncertainty in the wide receiver room beyond just like Jerry Jeudy, essentially, and a guy in Cedric Tillman you're hoping could maybe take that next step this year. But as far as the Cleveland Browns offense goes in 2025, I'm just not super high on it. I'm not trying to sound like a hater or be a hater or point and laugh at the Browns or anything like that. It just kind of is the situation that Cleveland's in my eyes right now. And until things start to settle and we get a more clear picture, I don't really feel too high on them at the current moment here. So we stick with the Browns at number 4. Moving into the number 3 spot. And I will say that the Aaron Rodgers signing didn't really affect this position. It just made me feel better about them. But I will go with the Pittsburgh Steelers at the number 3 spot. And this is one of those things where if we get Aaron Rodgers during the good moments that he had last season in New York, Pittsburgh should be in a better spot. They are in a far better position now, in my eyes, with Aaron Rodgers under center than you are with Mason Rudolph. I know a lot of people have a lot to say about Aaron Rodgers and whether or not he's really going to have an impact for this team. And while I did say I do like the direction they are going in, especially now with a quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, who, again, I definitely think is a better option than Mason Rudolph at this point, there are still some questions to look at for this offense that I need to see answering altogether. But again, I do like the addition of Rodgers. I think going out and getting a DK Metcalf, and basically you made a big swap as far as number 1 wide receivers go. You move on from George Pickens after bringing in DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf, in my eyes, he feels like a Pittsburgh Steeler. Like, that guy fits the mold of the Pittsburgh Steelers, so I think it makes a ton of sense. Yeah, you still have a guy who has a lot of passion for the game, and you can definitely see that on the field at times, but I do think it's maybe a tad below what you had in George Pickens. The rest of the wide receiver room, I'm like in varying degrees of whether it's uncertain or at least intrigued in what they could potentially do in a larger role. Calvin Austin III in a lot of spots has looked really solid for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and Robert Woods obviously was brought in this past offseason as well. You have a 3rd-round pick in Roman Wilson out of last year who dealt with some injuries early in the season, and maybe now with a nice healthy offseason and a good opportunity to really get things going right out of the gates to start the season. Hopefully you see more from him because he was somebody you brought in that you hope to maybe have a little bit more of an impact on this offense. So going into year 2, you're hoping for that. I like the wide receiver room, I guess I could say. I'm definitely more intrigued than I would say I like, but I do like them to a degree. Tight end room, obviously you have Pat Freiermuth, who is as sure-handed as anybody in the league, reliable over in the middle there. The offensive line, interior is going to be the same, but the offensive tackle position will be definitely something we look at, of course, with Broderick Jones being moved back to the left tackle side, and of course Troy Fautanu, who essentially missed all of last season. I think he played in 1 game last year, if I'm not mistaken. You have him coming in, your 1st-round selection from last year's draft. So this is a big season, I would say, for Broderick Jones, because this is a lot of people were calling for this. A lot of people saying this was his natural position. This is where he should have been out of the gate. Dan Moore Jr. obviously spending all of essentially last season, or for the most part, all of last season, playing at left tackle for them, while Broderick Jones was on the right side there. So now Jones is getting his opportunity to move to the left side. A lot of people have called for this, and I'm really interested to see if he gets back to the level of play that a lot of people were expecting of him coming out of college and what he was able to do during his time in college. And then, of course, Fautanu, how does he do coming back from that injury last season? And, of course, taking over the reins on the right side now. And then the running back room. This is also something that I think deserves some attention here. I do like to a degree, but there is definitely a bit of a you got to prove yourself type of situation brewing in the running back room right now. Obviously, a 3rd-round selection in Caleb Johnson I think is a good boost after letting go of Najee Harris, but it's Jaylen Warren. All eyes are going to be on him, and this is somebody that I know Steelers Nation has been banging the table for, getting the opportunity to be the running back 1 in this offense. And now here's his opportunity. Najee Harris no longer with the football team. You feel like he is the de facto number 1 guy, a very shifty but also runs with power type of back. He can catch out of the backfield as well, do it all type of running back, if you will. And this is one that I'm excited to see him take this opportunity and really get to run for it, because again, there has been a lot of conversation during the time that Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren have been in the backfield of back and forth between who should be running back 1, whether it was Harris or whether it was supposed to be Warren. Who whether the Steelers were in the right or in the wrong as for who was getting the most number of touches out of the backfield. Jaylen Warren's game is a little bit more dynamic just because he's more of a receiver out of the backfield than Harris was. So that is definitely an interesting thing to keep in mind. There's a lot of intrigue with the Pittsburgh Steelers offense, and the way it is currently built as it stands, I do think it should be better than what it was last season. It's just a matter of, do we actually get that? I do think that bringing in Aaron Rodgers brings them a lot closer to Cincinnati and Baltimore, but just the offensive potency that we've seen from Cincinnati and from Baltimore, I do think at this current moment still keeps them ahead of the pack. Then moving into the number 2 spot, I feel like, there's probably some conversation that can be had for who you think should be number 1 and who you think should be number 2. But my number 1 team, I do think, has a bit of an edge in one department, and we'll get to it when we get to it. But at the number 2 spot, I decided to settle on the Cincinnati Bengals. That being said, it's not that I don't think this Bengals offense has the potential to overtake Baltimore. It's just a matter of, you have a little bit more of a sure thing in the running game in Baltimore's end, and we'll talk about it when we get to it, but I do really like what you have brewing in Cincinnati. Now, you need better defensive play, but aside from that, what the offense brings to the table, if you get poor defensive play again this season, I mean, at least you can count on an offense that had no trouble putting up 35, 40 points last season. I mean, it felt like they were doing it each and every single week in Cincy. So this is an offense that can essentially go shot for shot with basically anyone in the NFL. T. Higgins is coming back. There was a lot of debate this offseason about whether the Bengals are going to be able to keep him around, but now it's Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. You have by far, just out of those 3 alone, probably the most threatening trio when you talk quarterback to 2 wide receivers. Like, that is probably the best group of 3 that you have in the NFL right now. There's a lot of debate I'm sure you could have maybe with some other people, but in my eyes specifically, Joe Burrow to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins is about as good as it's going to get when you look around the rest of the NFL as far as a quarterback and 2 wide receivers are concerned. You add in Mike Gesicki, who had his best season since 2021 in Miami last year as well, and this is a strong case for arguably best passing attack in the NFL. Strong case. That's not the conversation we're having today. I do think there's an argument there to be made. I'm not saying that they are, but there is definitely a case to be made for Cincinnati. That being said, a couple of other things I will be interested in seeing how they play out. The offensive line, definitely seeing a little bit of reworking this offseason, especially along the interior. You go and you bring in Dylan Fairchild, who was drafted in the third round. Oh my goodness, tongue-tied here for a second. Then, of course, you sign guard Lucas Patrick as well from New Orleans, obviously previously in Chicago prior to that. I do think that that'll be something that is definitely worth keeping an eye on, because when it comes to protecting Joe Burrow, Cincinnati has not necessarily done the best in that department. Even just last season alone, tied for 11th in sacks with 48 allowed last season. It's been a constant issue where, because Joe Burrow is such a fast processor at the line of scrimmage, and also when he gets the ball in his hands, I feel like if this was any other quarterback that we were talking about, or at least a vast majority of other quarterbacks, those sack numbers are probably even higher. But that speaks to just how good of a quarterback Joe Burrow is and his ability to process things pre-snap and as things are developing along the football field. I will say I'm expecting maybe a little bit of a lift here, and that in part has to do with the other thing that I'm talking about here and highlighting for the Bengals, and that's going to be the running back room. Of course, Chase Brown last season. I don't know if Bengals fans were anticipating this. I certainly wasn't. I was actually extremely high on the Zach Moss signing last season for the Cincinnati Bengals, and when I saw them let go of Joe Mixon and bring in Zach Moss, I loved what Zach Moss did for Indianapolis while Jonathan Taylor wasn't playing. I thought Zach Moss was honestly primed and ready for a legitimate running back 1 role in the NFL. Obviously, things never really got going. He missed like the entire back half of the season as well. So things never really got off the ground for Zach Moss. But Chase Brown, I mean, you look at what he did, 10 yards shy of 1,000 yards on the ground. He had 7 rushing touchdowns and another 350 plus on through the air. I believe 360 was the total he was at. Another 4 receiving touchdowns to boot on top of that. Chase Brown kind of showed that he can be that do-it-all running back that you need, a guy who can run out of the backfield, he can catch out of the backfield. This is someone that you could potentially build your running back room around, and I'll be really curious to see if last year was just a flash in the pan for Cincinnati, or if Chase Brown really is that guy. And You went and you spent money on Zach Moss last offseason and it was all for nothing because Chase Brown was your answer always. So we'll see what they do there, but I really like what Cincinnati is brewing on offense. The defensive conversation is something we'll get to down the road, and that is a whole other story, but if there was any offense right now in the NFL that I feel like you could count on to potentially win you a shootout based off of the track record we've gotten from Cincinnati and them basically keeping the band of offensive weapons together for another season, I'd probably go with Cincinnati in a fair, I would say, 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 times, I'd probably go Cincinnati just because of how explosive the offense has been. Again, the debate is up as to whether they are the most potent passing attack in the NFL, but I do think they have a strong case to be made. And then, of course, at the number 1 spot, we're looking at the Baltimore Ravens. Who else but the Ravens? I do think that a big reason as to why I was so willing to put them at the number 1 spot, despite just the potency you see from Cincinnati, is really because I do think that Baltimore is far more well-rounded, especially on the ground. While Chase Brown's emergence last season was really exciting, you can't dismiss the fact that Derrick Henry had literally 1,000 more yards rushing on the ground, nearly 1,000 more yards rushing on the ground than Chase Brown did, totaling over 1,900 yards on the ground last year, coupled with the fact that Lamar Jackson just continues to be that guy. And I feel like I talk about this all the time. Lamar Jackson is one of my favorite quarterbacks, never mind just in the NFL, but just as of right now, but in general. And I'm somebody who was a huge fan of Peyton Manning growing up, big fan of Dan Marino as well. I was a huge fan of Michael Vick growing up as well. And Lamar Jackson is essentially Michael Vick, but can actually throw the football efficiently. You look at the numbers last year, 41 touchdowns to just 4 interceptions, a 67% completion rate. I mean, Lamar Jackson is as good as they come, and he has the MVP awards that he has for a damn good reason. You couple that with Derrick Henry, who came in last season and delivered. The 1-2 punch that they have there, what they are able to do out of the backfield is unbelievable. And I can only imagine with another year in the system, it's only going to get better. I have no reason, and I don't think Derrick Henry has given anyone a reason to believe that this Ravens offense can't be even better than it was last season. And sure, maybe Lamar doesn't have as few interceptions as he had last season. Going an entire year with only 4 is a rarity. You do not get single-digit interceptions that low very often in the NFL. Maybe that number ticks up a bit, but I do think that this offense, with Derrick Henry in the fold after a full off season again, is going to be potentially even better than what we got. And I really like what they've done as far as retooling themselves this year. There's not really a ton that's changing, but there are a couple of things here and there that they added a lot more. It just seems to be work as far as depth is concerned. But bringing in DeAndre Hopkins, while I don't sit here and think that he's going to have 1,000 yards receiving for them, he is more so known for his ability to box out defenders and be able to go up and get the football. And I think that's going to be how he utilizes there. And I don't really think, outside of the tight end situation with Andrews, maybe, you have Mark Andrews over the seam and he can do things, but DeAndre Hopkins brings that to you a little bit more out wide, and it gives you a second big body guy, and just a guy that has a great catch radius and great hands to work with when you get into the red zone. So I really like the opportunity he has there. Obviously, the receiver room is going to be more led so by Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, those guys, but I do like what DeAndre Hopkins brings to the offense. And then, of course, as far as the offensive line goes, the only real big change, Patrick Macari being allowed to walk. Andrew Voorhees, fantastic name, coming out of the 7th round in a draft a couple of seasons ago. He's going to be stepping up and into that spot. And it feels like he's a guy that's been there, just kind of working in the shadows, working for his spot, and it seems like Baltimore feels like he's ready to go. I have no real concerns about this team. I mean, I love that they extended Rashad Bateman. Sure, you could point out some really ill-timed drops that he's had throughout his career, but he's someone that I don't think he gets that extension unless Lamar Jackson is in the background when that kind of contract negotiations going on, I want Rashad around. He very clearly loves getting him the football. He loves having him as a receiver on his football team, and I would not be shocked or surprised to find out at some point down the road that Lamar Jackson was in the background of those conversations if we can keep him, please keep him, because it's very clear that Lamar Jackson loves being able to give him the football. Again, there's a few untimely drops he's had in his career, and if we can just put those behind us, I do think that this offense has every bit of potency that it had last season. And I have no reason to think that they're not going to be just about as good as they were last year. Maybe like a hair of a step back. Maybe you get 1,600 yards out of Derrick Henry instead of the 19, nearly 2,000 he had this past. But I don't expect things to slow down. You still have an unbelievable dual-threat quarterback in Lamar. Derrick Henry presents that insane problem that you have to deal with now, whether it's either Lamar or Derrick Henry. And when the Ravens get in a groove and you're trying to figure out who's getting the football, you have to devote resources to one or the other. You can't do both. It's a problem. And in theory, it was threatening last season. We saw the theory come to fruition, and we have yet to see anyone slow it down. So I'm feeling pretty good about Baltimore and having them in the number 1 spot. But those are my rankings for the AFC North offenses. Let me know in the comment section down below. Thoughts, opinions, agree, disagree, your rankings, all that, fire away. Let me know. I'd love to discuss with you all. Love a good verbal joust. But as always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.